really an interesting structure because it attaches, or it's next to the Louis Kahn architecture building at Yale, which is, some people think, not a very nice building. Some people love it, but I guess it's there to stay. It's certainly at odds with the rest of the architecture on that campus. And you erected something that strikes me as both having a very modern or maybe postmodern look, but also echoing Gothic elements. And were you very much aware of those two? I mean, you were sort of in between this modernist building on the one hand and then the very traditional architecture on the other.
Yeah, the particular site is actually a block away from Kahn's building, so it wasn't directly appended to
Rudolph's A&A.
and
Okay.
a block away from Rudolph's A&A building, which helped, frankly. And it was also a new site that
Was
the university hadn't previously developed, and it was a mid-block site with a lot of historic and commercial development around its perimeter. So there was some latitude because it was seen as an edge campus site, on the stylistic grounds. That said, I don't think we were really overtly conscious of the Gothic.
It so evokes
precedents.
Gothic
But here's what I'll say about it.
I think the environmental, if I could just interject, I think that building had schedule and budget principally as its driver. Do it in 23 months for a certain amount of money because they had to help, make space for all these other things to happen. It had a high environmental agenda that we took even higher. We exceeded their environmental agenda. Out of that environmental agenda comes an aesthetic that is now found to be quite Gothic, because the juxtaposition and one of the views that you have of the exterior wall, the south wall with the sunscreen, and the Sterling Library Tower, is fundamentally one's a Gothic, a collegiate Gothic done with all the tracery and all the trappings, and the other is done because of a purpose and a need. And so, yes, we think that in the end, the stylistic agendas probably come more closely in alignment with one another, but again, they're simultaneous histories. They were created of different whole cloth agendas.
That's really interesting, actually.
And an important point is that both aesthetics did not originate because of anybody's stylistic preconceptions. They originated for a set of rather pragmatic and purposeful reasons. In the case of Gothic, most of what we see today was derived from a structural performance requirement for those buildings. To give them the capacity to admit light, the stone had to be lightened up. That required finials and buttresses and all kinds of things that we think of today as ornamentation.
That's, of course, the original Gothic, as opposed to the neo-Gothic. That was, there we're doing it to give a sense of a certain sense of things. Yeah, but your buildings are done more, I guess, in the authentic sense.
Well, we were looking at environmental issues in terms of that particular case, in terms of solar shading on a very brutal south exposure where we wanted, and the program required tremendous amounts of daylight in the building to perform the art or develop the art inside. So it developed rather naturally without us thinking, how is this going to go with the Gothic? But it's, I think, telling that in the end, if you go after a problem substantively in terms of real content and performance, that an aesthetic will develop around that content and that performance that'll have a lot of positive benefits. That's organic and fits.
So. Well, if I could just switch gears a little bit and talk about, since you mentioned the environmental and the practical, another aspect of the work that you've done that's so important, so interesting, are the prefabricated structures, the Loblolly house, Loblolly,
well done,
which is the prototype for the Cellophane house, and we'll show both the Loblolly house was done for a, is that the name of the owner of the house? Or
It's the name of the trees.
It could be.
Oh,
It's Steve's house.
It's my own house.
it's your house. Oh, interesting. So you can tell us what it's like to live in that
Sure,
house.
absolutely.
That's the prototype for the Cellophane house, which we'll also show, which is now on the site of the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. Still there, will be there for a while, I assume, and it's been erected with 4 other structures, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit first about your house, the Loblolly house, and then about the Cellophane house, if you will.
Sure. Now, Loblolly House was originated really as an experiment, as a prototype. You know, my family and I wanted a home, and you know, wanted to live down on the Chesapeake Bay. James suggested that we bring it into the office and make a research project, in essence, out of it, or a prototype. And we had written a book called Refabricating Architecture about the processes and methods that we use to make architecture. And we're deeply concerned about the lack of sustainability in terms of economics and environment and productivity in the processes and methods we use to make our buildings. And we took that house on as a frontal assault on a direction or an answer, because it doesn't do us a lot of good in the end to write books. We enjoy writing, but we're architects, and until you build, the theories don't mean much. So that's what the house is. It's an attempt to really build the arguments in our book, Refabricating Architecture. So we were after something we call not prefabrication, but off-site fabrication, taking away one of the great arguments about why we can't fabricate buildings off-site, because they'll always look the same. Well, they don't have to look the same. They can be customized to place and purpose just as well as any other building. So in a way, that's the thrust of the argument in the house, is to demonstrate that we can make headway and we can build things off-site. We can do it better with higher quality. We can do it faster. Make them into extraordinary places suited to their location.
Can you tell us about what sorts of decisions you made with this off-site fabrication for the Cellophane house, the one in Manhattan?
Well, that's an interesting whole other set of circumstances. That was an invited. It was an invitation to join that exhibition by MoMA, and as of about 15 months ago, the conception of that house didn't even exist. And Loblolly happened in much the same way. We won that invitation to join 4 other architects to do a house out on a lot, not unlike the show that was done 50 years ago by the Museum of Modern Art on off-site fabrication as well. They were giving us a certain amount of time to design and construct this house. When Steve and I sat down to talk about that, we said, well, this is something that we have to do rather rapidly. We have some ideas about not only Loblolly, but also some of our other research work on Smart Wrap, a thin film printed exterior plastic wall
Called Smart Wrap?
Called Smart Wrap, that we had been pursuing, and we decided that perhaps this house might be a provocation about living transparently and living translucently in an urban or rural environment in a mass customizable production house. It's off-site fabricated. We learned a lot of lessons from Loblolly. We chunked, broke the house, Cellophane house, into 18 pieces, some smart and some dumb, and we stacked them up and built 70% of the house in 6 days on site.
6 days?
6 days, and it took another 10 days to finish the other 30%.
Well, we're running a little bit out of time, so I want to get to the Suzanne Roberts Theatre here in Philadelphia, because we are here in Philadelphia. In your book, manual, The Architecture of Kieran Timberlake, you make mention of gerunds, which is a verbal noun, and you list 10 gerunds that you think reflect your core ideas: framing, hinging, joining, lining, patching, profiling, scaling, selecting, slipping, and weaving. It's a lot of gerunds. Thinking about
You did well.
the Suzanne Roberts Theatre, which we're going to project for our audience, could you maybe talk about a gerund or two with respect to that structure and how this idea works with that edifice?
Maybe you want to explain the gerunds first.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea behind the gerunds is simply that they're crafts. We believe very deeply in the craft of what we do, you know, of making beautifully constructed artifacts, and underlying that production for all of us, for anybody who makes anything, is a craft tradition. And for us, those gerunds are expressions of those craft traditions, you know, that tailors line things, for instance, so hence lining. Weavers obviously weave things, hence weaving. So they're all crafts, and they're all part of the skill of the architect that underlie all that we do. And that's what we spent the first 15 years of our career together trying to learn, was just how to be better craftspeople and how to manifest these gerunds. They're gerunds because they're always becoming. They're not static. They're not a noun. They're somewhere between a noun and a verb, and every act we undertake contributes to the development of them. And
so the sense of process
yes.
is there.
Precisely,
Yeah.
and you know, theaters are active, and these are active terms. So it's interesting that you make that convergence, because Suzanne Roberts Theatre is a very active place. It lines the street, and there's a slipping relationship between the street and the building itself, the actual interior of the theater. The theater is lined, so there's a lot of lining going on in the theater. There are off-site fabricated and off-site finished gypsum reinforced panels inside that give this sort of drapery effect on the inside of the theater. You know, theater's about craft, and we wanted to bring a great deal of craft to the museum.
Well, you make me want to run out now and take a look again at that theater.
Well, it's one of our
look at it more
favorite places.
closely and look at the craftsmanship of it.
Talk about an engaged client. There's a client that was truly engaged in that process at a variety of levels: board, president, director, staff, all engaged in making that place come together. And I think it's a true testament to their engagement, that particular interior.
Well, thank you very much. We're out of time now. It's really, we could go on, but this has been very illuminating. I want to thank you, Stephen Kieran.
You're welcome.
James Timberlake.
It's nice to be with you. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.